Hello and welcome to the Randomly Generated History Club, where three non-historians pick a year at random and try to learn things about it. I'm Will, and I'm here with my two friends, Ant and Anna.
Hello?
Those are still our names.
Okay, good. Just checking. This week we are talking about the year 1902, and I'd like all of us to give a 3-word preview, please, of what we're discussing today. Anna.
My 3 words are South Polar Time.
Ah, okay. What that's about? Mine.
It's about the Sahara Desert, actually.
My 3 words are friendly society assassin.
Oh.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A friendly society assassin.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, and mine are carriage and wagon.
It took me a second because I thought the "and" is part of this.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay, 3 words. Good.
Great.
Cool. Okay, right. Here we go. 1902. Okay, so this week I'm making a conscious effort to branch out, and I'm going to try not to talk about any kings or any battles whatsoever, which frankly doesn't feel like history at all.
Yeah.
To me.
Well,
But
were there any kings in 1902 in the world?
Oh, I could do a last-minute switch. That's so tempting. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so frankly, it doesn't feel like history, but this week I'm going to talk about 2 cultural phenomena. Football and Manchester United, specifically,
Okay.
which is a subset of football, I
Okay.
suppose.
Now, football, sorry, maybe you're going to clarify. You mean the kind you do with your legs and kick
Oh, what
ball.
Americans might call soccer ball.
Soccer
That's
ball.
correct, yeah. So
Okay.
for the avoidance of doubt, I'm talking about soccer
Okay.
Yeah.
rather than Aussie rules or rugby football or American football
Yes.
or any other kind of football.
Great.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm talking about Manchester United because it was kind of founded in 1902, sort of.
Good enough for the podcast.
Which I think in the legal sense, as we'll come on to, turns out not to be in fact true. But,
Great. There's more legal drama on our doorstep.
Will and his legalese.
Yeah.
But from a branding perspective, it's when Manchester United came about. So first of all, I will talk a little bit about the history of football, because we need to talk about that first before we talk about Manchester United. And I think really this is about how football became a thing, and a part of that was Manchester United getting founded, as much as it is specifically about Manchester United. So there's a reason it was founded at that particular time. So then it's worth discussing.
Now, it's not too late for you to change your mind and talk about a king or a battle.
Yeah.
Because we're going to lose a lot of people with this whole football chat, me included.
No, it's really interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, what's interesting is kind of how a cultural phenomena, whether you're interested in football as a sport or not, how these things come into being and the times in history at which they become possible and how they become really a concept that
so like a confluence of events leading to this.
Yeah, so that's what I find interesting
cultural.
about it.
Yeah, okay,
I happen
sense.
to be relatively into football, but I think it's interesting just in general about how it came about. So there's been some form of football for many, many hundreds of years in Europe, and different communities and local clubs would have their own sets of rules, and they would have a game that they could play that would involve kicking or throwing a ball around and scoring.
Sorry. I mean, kicking is a fundamental part of football, but just the way you described it, a game that would involve kicking. Yep, sorry. Carry on.
As opposed to...
I don't know. I just, it's great.
Okay, so... so they would kick.
Oh my God.
And or throw...
You know, we were just talking about going to the BBC about this podcast recently, and I don't think that's on the cards anymore.
Nope.
This is high quality analysis. And so it didn't really matter that all these rules were very different in different communities and different clubs, because no one was ever playing each other at all. And it wasn't until the mid-19th century in the UK that people started getting annoyed that when they travelled to new areas, the people in those areas didn't seem to play their favourite game in the way they did. And can anyone guess why this is something that happened in the mid-19th century in England rather than anywhere else?
Oh. Was this the founding of the foot? Did the foot just evolve then?
Was the weather so shit that you couldn't play anything that required you to like lift your head up and look at the sky?
Invention of nets.
Oh, yeah, good nets.
People did spend a lot of time sullenly looking to the floor.
Yeah.
during this period.
Yeah.
Well, until the foot came along and there's something to look at.
Yeah,
Exactly. They were mesmerised by their newly evolved feet. And they knew their place as well in those days, not like today.
Always looking up to the sky.
Yeah.
Damn you, Elon Musk.
So the answer is the railway network, which became mature in England during this early period. And it's just like many other things that the railway network did. It unified people like never before, and it brought a need for things that were like a precise and common time, for instance, so that previously didn't need before you had a need for railway timetables. So suddenly you needed to have very precise ways of telling time. You need common times across different towns. Whereas before, if it was vaguely the same time in a place here as a place 200 miles away, that was good enough and it wasn't a problem. And then similarly, you needed unity and unified mechanisms for doing all sorts of things, because currently you suddenly had all these people moving around the country really rapidly in a way they weren't before. And football was just one of these extra things. And it meant that clubs, for the first time, could travel long distances to play each other in leagues, and that was suddenly something you could afford to do. And so in common with that, unified rules emerged over a few decades from the point at which you had a mature railway system. And soccer, what would later become soccer, actual proper association football in the UK, was adopted in the 1860s. So Manchester United was actually founded not long after, in 1878, as Newton LYR Football Club.
Oh.
Now, can anyone guess what LYR stood for?
LYR. London Yarborough Railway.
London Yarborough Railway.
Yep.
Is one guess.
That's probably not right, but my guess is going to be no better. Is it's Loud Young Ruffians.
Louder Young Ruffians being the name of the people who
Play the football.
played the
and
football.
support, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who dared to look up from the floor
Yeah.
from their feet.
Look, yonder rainbow.
Yes, famously, the first person ever to look up, Mr. Manchester United, Mr. John Manchester United. That was what he remarked. No, so the answer is that it was founded by the Carriage and Wagon Department
Oh.
of,
CAW.
of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway.
Okay, I get partial credit for that
Because two places.
because I said railway.
Okay.
That is the most specific department in the most specific niche section of railway as well. It's like not
Which
even
department would you have preferred to have founded it from the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway?
sports and recreation. I don't know, yeah.
Okay. And the early years were just full of financial mismanagement. It kept going bust and having to be saved by donations. And in 1902, the year we're actually interested in,
Ding, ding, ding.
after going bust again, they reinvented the club with a new name, and they considered a bunch of different names. Can anyone think of any names they were going to think about? Manchester and then X. Manchester.
Manchester Look Yonder Rainbow is pretty good.
Yonder Rainbow.
Manchester Ruffians.
Manchester Ruffians.
Manchester Disunited.
Manchester Disunited.
Disaggregated Manchester, yeah.
So the answers were Manchester Celtic and Manchester Central were the other ones they considered.
Okay.
And then they obviously chose Manchester United, and that's when that brand came around. And the club did actually go bust again in the 30s, and it was bailed out again. But basically, from then on over time, it became more established as a business and became more financially stable. And now it is a $4 billion $4 billion business, roughly, depending on what the markets would value it at. That disappoints fans every week. That is the history of Manchester United.
That is incredible. I didn't know is associated. That makes sense with the railways. It doesn't make sense with the 4 billion though.
Is it is it the most valuable club in the world, or has it been surpassed?
I think it might be. I think maybe 8 or 9 years ago it probably was.
Yeah.
It was by some distance, and now maybe not so much.
Yeah. Still, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd just like to go on record and say that I am not a Manchester United fan.
I don't know what colour their uniform is. I am not sure what shape the ball is that they kick.
Or you don't even know what colour top hats they wear.
I have no clue what colour the top hat. Is there
some real football basics you don't
You
know?
absolute
not,
pleb. I'm talking today about a boat, or perhaps a ship.
This is being a trend now.
No,
We've put this to bed.
we're not gonna get into the weeds on that again. I'm talking about the Voyage of the Discovery, which was a ship that went to the Antarctic. And I really struggle saying the word Antarctic, which is unfortunate given how many times I'm about to say it. Around the turn of the century, so 1900, it is the early years of what's called the heroic age of Antarctic expedition. Later, that would be the mechanical age once technology improved. But for now, if you go to the Arctic or the Antarctic, it's kind of assumed that you are made of good, solid, tough stuff, and you're putting your life on the line to do it.
Wax type liniments.
So much wax. So much like meat yeast paste.
Oh, yeah. Good meat yeast paste.
That was the first question they were asked, wasn't it, when you were going to go and make the trip?
What paste
You're going
can
to
I bring?
Antarctic. That's so exciting. Wait. Have you got enough wax to...
No, but they did. They had a whole bunch of like ointments and tinctures and like woolen.
Sorry, was that tinctures?
Accoutrement, tinctures.
Tinctures,
And all kinds of woolen accoutrements.
I had no idea you were such an expert.
Do you know what? Many a time I've eaten a yeast paste, dreaming wistfully of the Antarctic.
All right, so tinctures aside, 60 years prior to this, an earlier British expedition had mapped the general area of Antarctica, but after that, there wasn't much activity until closer to 1900 because people realized it would be really hard to extract resources out of it, and the kind of competitive spirit hadn't sunk in. But then it did, and all of a sudden, these expeditions had many goals. There were a lot of scientists and naturalists on board of all of the expeditions that went to the Antarctic, but the overarching goal was always to be the first to reach the South Pole. It would be a tremendous amount of national pride. And subsequent expeditions go, and as the further south you go, you get to claim the title of furthest south until somebody makes it all the way down. And Discovery was one of the ones that was aiming for this. So the Royal Geographic Society, a real driving force behind the expedition, especially a man named Sir Clements Markham. He started thinking about what the expedition would entail and who could sail on it. And he had observed midshipman Robert Falcon Scott.
What a name.
Solid
I would follow
name.
that man to the Antarctic.
Well, yeah, liniments aside. So Clements Markham had seen Robert Falcon Scott 15 years earlier while he was...
Can I just... It's a bit of a cheat code, isn't it? Just inserting a bird of prey in your name.
Yeah, well, it would have been way less interesting if it were like Robert Grouse Scott.
That's true. Yeah.
Or Robert...
That's pretty adventurous.
Robert Goose Scott.
Yeah.
Would be a great fighter pilot.
I guess that's a fighter pilot correlation there. Anyway, he's Robert Falcon Scott, which is pretty cool. I'd also accept Peregrine. That would be neat. Anyway, so Markham sees midshipman Robert Falcon Scott when he's on duty in the Caribbean. And he, at that point, even though he's looking at like the lowest ranking man on a boat in the warmest sea, he kind of files him away. And 15 years later, he's like, yeah, that guy would be good for the Antarctic. I guess he was a really great sailor.
Sailor, I think that's right.
Yeah, sailor. That's how the British say it. Anyway, so Markham and Scott and the Associated Royal Geographical Society folks set about assembling a crew, which included Ernest Shackleton, who would go on to be a very famous Antarctic explorer in his own right. But on this ship had the unenviable post of third officer in charge of holds, stores and provisions, and responsible for arranging the entertainments.
He probably went on to form a football club with that kind of prestigious department behind him.
I mean, I cannot imagine the burden of arranging the entertainments on a ship that's going to go to Antarctica for 3 years. But he did it, and I will tell you so much more about that.
I'm excited.
They were accompanied by some scientists, of course, including a 22-year-old fresh out of Cambridge who was chosen because Sir Clements thought he, quote, might be made into a man.
This is starting to add up to a picture. He remembers a young man from 15 years ago he wants to sail the seas with, and then he wants to make a man of a young student as well.
I think the entire thrust of the Royal Geographical Society was making men out of men at this time.
Yes, I think there was a lot of thrusting done.
Anyway, so money for the expedition comes partly from the British government, partly from the Royal Society, Royal Geographic Society, and a very wealthy donor, and I loved his name, Llewellyn W. Longstaff.
Oh,
that's feeding right into your theory.
That is the fanfic writes itself.
And then the cool thing was that they had a ton of sponsorships for this voyage. Like, imagine a NASCAR or an F1 car with all the logos plastered on it. That's basically what they're doing. They had Burberry jackets, the chocolate was from Cadbury, the limes were from Evans, all this sort of stuff that the sponsors put in the press to make sure people knew about it.
Other jackets and chocolates are available.
Yes, you can buy them on randomlygeneratedhistory.com.
Yes, we are sponsored by Evans Limes.
Seriously, though, Evans, if you're out there still, we would love your sponsorship.
Oh, and the meat cubes were from Bovril. They had 1,000 pounds of tobacco. They had 23 dogs, 45 sheep.
How many dogs?
23.
But they're huskies, right?
Yeah. Like
right. Okay.
sled dogs.
Not just like comfort.
Not just
Yeah.
Yorkie poos.
Yeah, fine. Okay, fine.
So they set out from the Isle of Wight in August 1901, and they head down to Cape Town and then to New Zealand a few months later.
They were all from the Isle of Wight.
No, they set out from the Isle of Wight.
Okay.
Yeah, the Isle of Wight is really dense with explorers. Just chock-a-block. They reach Antarctica in January 1902, and one of the first things they do, I love this, is they get up into these two big observation balloons. So Commander Scott and Ernest Shackleton each go up in one. They go about 600 feet in the air, and all they see is white.
Yeah.
And so they promptly come back down from the balloons, and it was a pretty big waste of their time.
Did they use the balloons again?
I imagine maybe for fun.
Okay.
Just to sort of like a jolly day out in
To
the balloon.
escape the entertainments they're so sick of.
Yeah, to escape Shackleton's horrible entertainment program. So now we run into a couple of difficulties, namely that of the entire party of 48 men, none were skilled skiers, and only 2 of them had any experience with dog sleds, which is not great when you're talking about traversing a completely frozen and snowy and mountainous continent.
Yep.
But you know what they had was spirit. And coats provided by Burberry.
But that's a pretty big omission, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
It
those are the
really
two
is.
primary skills for moving around.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's the heroic age, not the mechanical age. Because these people had this sense of like, I'm going to get to the South Pole. It's not even a thing.
I mean, it literally is like the source of stiff upper lipness.
Yeah.
You know, it's just cracking on and doing
Oh, yeah.
it. You know?
Their lips were so stiff. Can you imagine how stiff they were in the UK? Then take them down to the frozen tundra of the South. Just
Yeah.
rigid upper lips.
Didn't complain about anything. How's the entertainment? Good.
Well, I want to come on to the entertainment because this is my favorite part. Shackleton is crushing it as the man in charge of entertainment. They played football on the ice, maybe big Manchester United supporters. He organized a lecture series and some amateur theatricals. And there was a magazine that Shackleton himself edited. And the magazine was called the South Polar Times. And I'm so going to go find a copy of it in the
so
British
cool.
Library. There's like 12 copies extant in the world. And Commander Scott loved the magazine and wrote about it in his journal, but acknowledged that, in his words, quote, in the circumstances, broad circulation would not be possible. Yeah, tough to get a distributor from Antarctica. It had cartoons and puzzles and sonnets and observations, but it also gives various accounts of the complex problems encountered by Scott, such as the weather, boredom, lack of resources, and isolation.
It's a very depressing read. Here's a puzzle and my diatribe and loneliness.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what else are you going to talk about? Anyway, just to kind of close out the expedition, some of the things they found here. So they discovered a colony of emperor penguins. They were one of the first people to ever see an emperor penguin, especially its rookery.
So they'd colonized the area first.
The penguins had colonized the area first. So
Wow. And were they from the Isle of Wight as well?
What was their blimp like?
the big penguin
Could they
blimp.
ski before they arrived?
I think penguins are probably pretty accomplished skiers, I would guess.
Don't they sort of slide around on
Well,
their
yeah,
tummies?
they're very good at tummy sledding. Yeah, there's a specific term for that. So, yeah, the penguins were there first, but then, as ever, the humans got the last laugh because they ate the penguins.
Classic human.
Classic
Amazing.
human.
Yeah.
But they had to do it to stave off scurvy.
Sure. Whatever
So-
the reason.
Scurvy.
You don't need a reason.
Surely with all those Evan limes, there's no scurvy to be had.
I know, I don't want to impugn the character of Evan's limes, but it's possible that they weren't good enough.
But they didn't know scurvy. No one knew the causes of scurvy.
Yeah,
until like 20s
because
or something.
vitamin A hadn't been discovered.
C,
Yeah.
isn't it?
C, yes. A may have been discovered at that
A was
point.
there.
A is the
was
other
there.
problem they have, because too much A you get from the liver of the huskies. So that was another thing that people in this era used to have a problem with. They
Really?
used to overdose on it.
Well, you know what they got from Shackleton? Vitamin Fun.
Oh.
He also had scurvy, though. So they kind of bed down on the Ross ice shelf for the winter of 1902, and then in November, which is the nicest time in Antarctica, relatively speaking, they set off across the ice. There were problems with the dogs. The men had snow blindness and frostbite and scurvy. But on Christmas, they got double rations,
Nice.
including a Christmas
More
pudding.
yeast paste.
Yeah, to cover their penguins in.
Double helping of yeast paste. No, they got a Christmas pudding that Commander Scott had hidden with his socks.
Oh.
So
nice.
just a
He
really
seems
nice.
like a good dude.
He was okay.
Oh.
Yeah, he wasn't like a bad guy, but I
Okay.
think he and Shackleton had some beef
Oh.
paste.
They hid the beef as well.
In the beef. And on December 30th, 1902, they reached the new furthest south. They set a new record for furthest south, which was 82 degrees, 17 minutes south.
Okay.
And remember that south-south is 90 degrees, so pretty close.
That's pretty impressive.
And just a couple of notes to close out. So a relief ship comes in early 1903 and takes several of the men home, including Shackleton, who was recovering from scurvy. But don't worry, he would go back to Antarctica later. The kid from Cambridge got a glacier named after him, which is really cool.
Nice.
They discovered King Edward VII land, which is
Ah.
very strange that they found a land that had been named after the current
I guess the
king
penguins
of
named it that.
England. Yeah, the penguins are big.
That was emperor.
Yeah, they're
emperor
big
land.
Ed heads. At one point, they lost their navigational tables in a storm and had to find their way back based entirely on Scott's rule of thumb navigation.
Just go north.
Yeah.
Rule of thumb, everyone.
Go north. They did exploration and science. The Discovery got frozen in ice, but they got it out by blowing the ice up, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
And then ultimately they made it back to England in September 1904. So that is just a little bit about the voyage of the Discovery.
That all in, that is pretty heroic.
It's so cool.
That is very heroic.
Yeah.
Going completely into the unknown with nothing but yeast paste and wool liniments. And then coming back, how many months, years later?
3 years.
3 years
Yeah,
later.
3 years. They're gone.
I've been to Dundee.
And ate all the wildlife
That's
along the
basically as far away as Antarctica.
way. Ate the
Is
penguins
it
in the
possible
zoo.
I visited that ship in Dundee?
Oh, okay.
I think it might be in Dundee.
Okay, yeah. I don't know.
It was some time ago. Please write in, and if you can see that ship right now,
if
or
you've
you have seen that
the
ship
Discovery
in
yeah.
Dundee,
Send
please
a
let us
picture.
know.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
We
so that's
cannot be
that.
bothered to Google it.
That sums up the next segment very well. I'm going to talk about some Russian history, and specifically the events that led up to the assassination of Dmitry Sipiagin.
Spoiler alert.
Yes, and I will apologize in advance for the pronunciations.
Yeah.
It is quite tough for a lot of these, but I will try my best. So if you want to correct me, also write in, and I will ignore them.
But just to clarify, you would need to record yourself saying it
Yes.
and then send that recording in.
Yes.
Do that. Don't just write in with the same word again. 'Cause we will just
Got it
mispronounce
right.
that word again, and it will create an endless cycle of mispronunciation.
Exactly.
Please, sorry, carry on.
So, first of all, Dmitry Sipiagin, he rose to the director of the Ministry of Interior, and he oversaw this very important phase, which was the Russian student strike in 1899. And this overseeing of this would ultimately lead to his downfall. And so we need to set the scene of Russia at this time, and how do we get from students and striking to an assassination? And this is a extremely complicated sort of rise of socialism and all this sort of anti-Tsarist movements. But this actually changed, kind of funnily enough, with Alexander II. When he was Tsar in 1855, he was responsible for a lot of the emancipation of Russian serfs, reforms, reorganizing the judicial system, abolishing corporal punishments and promoting local governments, decentralizing power, and removing some of the privileges that nobility had. That was great.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, until he was nearly assassinated in 1866. And I quote, he adopted a somewhat more reactionary stance. Yeah.
I feel like almost being killed would make you pretty reactionary in general.
For sure. And like he becomes more and more like afraid of anarchists, which potentially he could have sown the seeds for liberalizing the sort of the populace. And this goes to show, hold on to power with an iron grip and never let anything go.
But we at some point we should publish a handbook for
how to rule a nation.
Competent Dictatorship.
Yeah, I completely agree.
We're really collecting quite a number of important lessons throughout this series.
Yeah, don't worry, you'll be able to buy that from the website.
Some other interesting facts about him. He was the czar that actually sold Alaska back to Russia, or Alaska to America.
Seward's Folly.
Yes, exactly. And he was quite a pacifist in his international politicking. He distanced himself from the rambunctious French that were getting a bit fighty. And he cozied up with the Germans and Austrians and formed a cool rock band called the League of the Three Emperors.
Ooh, that's such a cool rock band.
That is a really good band.
Did he really?
No, not actual rock band, just like a I guess a commune of leaders that would talk about things that they were anti-French, effectively.
Otto von Bismarck on the harpsichord. And
his deep fear around the harpsichord, underrated music instrument in the rock world.
But what would you pair? You'd pair that with with like a bassoon?
Yeah, definitely a bassoon. Yeah, you need some sort of percussion.
Yeah, definitely. His deep fear of revolt sort of culminated in when he stamped down this Polish uprising that was happening, and he got rid of sort of Polish direct rule and took that into Russia. Central is part of Russia at the time, and it's one of the key sources of that sort of Russian-Poland sort of friction to this day, dates back to this time. And he was kept on trying to make more reforms to the judiciary and like rule, stamping out anarchists from potentially assassinating people in power. And then he was assassinated. So that
this is Alexander II.
Yes, Alexander II.
Oof.
So this sets the scene, though, for this sort of student uprising and the rebellion. Emancipated, socially mobile, and socialist educated population now in these universities that were no longer like elitist per se. And they formed student bodies, as you do. They had Rex and Socks, and they created one called the Friendly Society, which was about welcoming students. And there's a drinking club, as well as like talking about student sort of politics and things like that. Student matters. They elected a president and they demanded audience with, the rectors or whatever inside the university. But that was actually illegal. You weren't allowed to do this by the laws set for this anti-sedition laws that Alexander II did. They had to go kind of underground, a bit more clandestine. So then they did what students did. They just drank and they had marches to the streets. And
one of those things resonates with me.
You've never marched? Oh my God, I love the marches.
Yeah.
But these were like, ostensibly non-political marches, but they got more rowdy and more violent as like just people drinking on the streets often do, brawling in the streets. And then the marches were banned and the student bodies rebelled against that, protested, and they blockaded the police. And, they got a bit bloody after a while because they, started throwing snowballs at the police, and the police escalated to whipping students to sort of bloody shambles and caused a lot of, discontent amongst the student populace.
Ugh.
So mixed amongst the students was all this sort of varying sort of political flavor of sort of socialism and left-wing politics, and importantly, a political movement called Nardonics, Nardoniks, which were, directly...
Not sardonic.
Not sardonic, Nardonics.
Dry sense. Dryness is a political movement.
Dryness is a political movement, which you would be the chief principal officer for. Chief wit and whip. But these were blatantly anti-Tsarists and like pretty much verboten.
Okay. Totally
and they were kind of like sort of a flavor of socialists. They believed in decentralizing of power. And they were much more hostile towards the state, but they were kind of hard to separate from the students themselves that were just like there to drink and fight, versus the, anti-capitalists Nardonics. So this violence and brewing discontent started fermenting into student strikes, more arrests, escalations of frictions, and then eventually sort of this culminated when it was decided that the Minister of the Interior was able to punish students by conscripting them into the army.
Oh,
and sending them to Serbia or not Serbia, sorry, Siberia, Siberia, etc. I can't read my own notes.
Can I just say, conscripting me into the army would end up being a punishment on the country that did it, because I would not be a good soldier.
Yeah, so like the people were effectively being exiled for these strikes.
Hang on, so they'd conscript you into the army and send you to Siberia?
Yes, so as in like you're going to the Siberian Institute for Army Reform or whatever it is, like like just like nominally like military service, but it's actually like you're being taken out of the city.
Just go and be here now.
Just for like being rowdy and sort of I guess for being anti-czar.
And there was also like this sort of mixture of political ideology that was vaguely anti-czarist and anti-capitalist and that kind of stuff. So this stoked the fires of intrigue and plot further, and this is where we come into our next protagonist, which is Stefan Valerianovich Balmashov, who now steps into the history books. He was actually from a Narodnik family.
Can we call him Stefan?
Narodnik, I think is the pronunciation. Narodnik, yeah, sorry. His parents were actually in exile when he was in university, and he spent 3 months in prison for protesting, and then he was exiled. He finally made his way back to Kharkiv. He's banned from entering the university, but came into contact with various like brewing political movements. Like, there's an overlap of Marxist, populist, social democrats, and there's quite free-flowing members between each sharing ideology and all loosely aligned but political differences at this stage. They hadn't sort of struck into their own.
There's like a loose coalition of anti-Tsar people. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So he finally gets into uni. Stefan finally gets in, and there's a huge crackdown now on students, with lots being deported. And him and several other students blame the Minister of Interior for actually trying to get a grip of the situation, conscripting all these students. Dmitry was blamed. And then he was there for the forming of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, which was a much more coherent, like they had a stated aim of not just drinking and talking about the Tsar and what a bad person they were, but like actively want to do something about it. And they had a military wing, which was called the Battle Organization, whose main mission was the assassination of government officials.
Oh.
Yeah. So like they were quite organized and extremely like anti-establishment. And their top of the list, enemy number one, Minister of the Interior, Dmitry. So Balmashov volunteered as tribute, and he went to the palace where Dmitry was going to be, which is the Mariinsky Palace. And he dressed up as one of the palace attendants and waited for him there, did a lap around the block there, and came back and shot him several times, where Dmitry then died later on.
Yep.
And he was arrested, and when questioned, he only answered with the words, "The method of combating a terrorist seems to me inhumane and cruel, but is inevitable with the current regime." And they could get nothing more from him. He didn't elaborate any further, didn't say who he was working with, etc.
It's not that clever, is it? It's not very pithy.
It's not pithy. I think he wasn't a sardonic.
Yeah.
So.
He chose his group.
Yeah.
But he was found guilty of assassination and murder and
yeah.
But lots of people
he did it. So.
Yeah, he did do it. But there was lots of interesting calls for pardon because they thought this might flame more if they made a martyr of this guy, or they punished him too much. They asked for pardon, but they're not heeded, and he was hanged. In May 1902. The troubles didn't end there with the Russians in this time of history. It didn't just stop there. The Tsars are still ruling there. That didn't happen. So from there, the subsequent person that took over who's called, oh boy, here we go, Vyacheslav Konstantinovich von Plave.
Can we maybe choose a shortened version of that?
Barry.
Barry's good.
Yeah, he was assassinated 2 years later.
God.
And because there's a massive anti-Jewish sentiment and violence happening in 1903, and the Socialist Revolutionary Combat Group, another sort of socialist sort of political military wing, threw a bomb into his carriage and assassinated him.
Oh God! Wait, hang on. He took over from the assassin.
He took over from Dmitry.
Oh, he's the Minister of
He's now Minister of Interior.
Okay.
And he
Barry's he's in a carriage. Bomb comes in through the window. Boom! Barry's dead.
And it's actually really fascinating because, like, for the first time in this history podcast, there's actually pictures from this era.
Yeah.
And there's pictures of the subsequent aftermath of this assassination, where you can see the exploded carriage. You can see onlookers. There's even video footage of a tram going past. And
wow.
Yeah, it's really brings it home. And you can even see his top hat in the road and things like that. It's like, it's like poignant media, almost close to propaganda of like, like we want to make sure that this is known about.
Manchester Celtics top hat.
Yeah, Manchester stuff. And And this is one of the sort of highlights / lowlights of Russian history around this time, and one of the inflection points of student strikes and protests and this sequence of assassinations that led to the bubbling socialist movements of Russia, and then on to the 1907 coup, and subsequently the 1917 revolution, the rise of the Bolsheviks, and then the very bloody civil war.
Yeah.
Just altogether a very dark era in Russian history. And Russian history is absolutely fascinating. I knew nothing about this before now, but it is definitely a bit grim. So I do apologize.
You succeeded.
And there we go. That's Russian history 1902.
Grim.
Grim.
Yep.
But, as you said, a lead into some really kind of interesting stuff that so. If the RNG ever blesses us with the year 1917, I imagine we'll have a real hootenanny.
Oh boy, trust me.
We have no control of the...
No. I know. It is an omniscient and capricious master.
For sure.
It's frowned upon to even speculate upon the number that it might put out.
I'll go do my absolutions.
Exactly. Pray to the good number generator.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Everything you need to know about 1902.
So before we go on, I just want to say a quick thank you. There's been some good activity signing up for membership to the Randomly Generated History Club. We've got some board members, so thank you very much for your support. And thank you all for listening. It's really quite nice to know that people are listening to this and enjoying this. So if you do like this, please just tell your friends. We'd love to welcome them to the club.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing people could do if you wanted to support us and you didn't want to become a member or a board member, which is a bit weird. But if you if you wanted to do something else, then you've probably got a friend somewhere. You probably got probably got a friend.
Look deep into your heart and see if there's a person in the world who doesn't dislike you.
And that person could enjoy listening to the podcast as well. So if you do have a friend, do try to tell that friend about the podcast, and that could be something you could do.
And if you don't have a friend, you can buy our friendship by signing up for membership.
Yeah, you can buy our friendship and our best friendship. There are two tiers of friendship available.
And I will send you daily affirmations.
Oh, and the other thing is you could leave a review and a 5-star thing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
People find us. That'd be great. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So any one of those things would be great.
Yeah, I agree. Well, anyway, moving on. Thanks for joining us once again. I think that's everything you ever need to know about 1902. As always, any questions, comments, find us on Twitter, visit our website, randomlygeneratedhistory.com. You can message us directly.
That's right. And that means that it's time to choose our next year. So, Will, can you please boot up the random number generator?
Yes, but I don't like that tone.
I'm sorry, that was so flippant. And I've already pissed it off once by suggesting a year for it to choose. This is going to be
minus 999 now.
You will displease the generator. So as a reminder, we've set the random number generator, which I respect, to choose a year between 1000 BCE and 2000 CE. And our next year is 1245.
Huh. Ooh, that's our first 13th century year,
I believe. I by default, I know nothing about this year. I should not even say that anymore. No one's surprised that I know nothing about years.
I think you should just say Shakespeare every time until we get...
No, 1245, I'm going to guess what happened. Crusade territory?
Yeah, I think we're still like in the later Crusades.
Chaucer's Bar Mitzvah.
That's a different rock band composed of 3 different emperors.
Well, there you are, 1245. See you next time.
Toodle pip.